Back here on the show to talk some more about the Philadelphia Eagles. Them riding their high horse, obviously, this free agency. They added a lot outside of just Saquon, which was a massive acquisition, but mainly on the defensive side of the ball, where last year they had a great chance of breaking that streak of consecutive champions for the NFC East division. We haven't seen a repeat champion in that division since I want to say almost 2004, 2003, somewhere around there. So it's been a long time, really, is what I'm trying to say. And the Eagles had a good chance of breaking that streak this year when they were 10-1. It seemed like they were cruising to be back-to-back NFC East champions, but obviously they had that losing streak. It derailed everything, and Dallas ended up winning the division. And the Eagles traveled to Tampa Bay, got their butts kicked, and now they find themselves in an offseason where a lot of change was expected. They brought in the two new coordinators, offensive and defensive, but they also added a lot to this defensive unit that had a lot of holes last year, especially at that linebacker and secondary level. A lot of the heat actually fell on James Bradbury. Their linebacking unit also, again, like I mentioned, wasn't that great with them signing guys off of the free agent market to come in, trying to plug holes where it was never really going to work just because you're so late into the season. Everybody's so high on this intensity. They're on a different level when you're talking about week 16, week 17 to week 13, and you're adding guys to that defense to try and plug these holes. It's never really going to work as good as you had hoped. So it was never really a cohesive unit for the defense on that side of the ball. Their defensive line was great, but behind that, if any team got behind that, it was, it was just wraps for the Eagles, really, is what I'm trying to say. So now, this year, they had a lot of new guys come in, and Darius Slay, a veteran on this team, has seen a lot and how this team has changed. Went on Chris Long's podcast, another former Eagle, to give his outlook on some of the impressions on the new players as well as some of the young players that he has been really impressed with so far throughout the OTAs and mandatory minicamp period. I have it up here for you guys just to see some of the players I'm referring to while I'm talking about them. Firstly, he mentioned the return of C.J. Gardner-Johnson, the former Philadelphia Eagle in 2022, part of that great defense that they had. He moved on to the Lions last year. He was only there for a one-year deal, and now this offseason he re-signs with the Philadelphia Eagles, and he had a great year with Philadelphia back then. I want to say he was tied for the league lead in interceptions that year, and then he moved on to Detroit, and he made some pretty questionable comments about the Philadelphia fan base that wouldn't have him in the best of spirits with some of the fans, but now that he is back, he apologized for everything that he said to them, and now Darius Slay, his comments on him, he said that they pretty much hashed everything out within the locker room, within the players, and just with the fans as well. He actually praised CJ's energy, most of all, with what he brought to this team, apart from having great ball skills and just being a good football player, like everybody can obviously see on the field. Darius Slay really made it a point to emphasize CJ's energy, his trash talking, even though it might be unique to him and he might be the one always starting the trash talking. It just brings a good energy, like Darius Slay said, that just it's contagious to the rest of the defense, really makes an impact on top of him just being a great player. So that's what CJ is pretty much bringing back, a partnership that you'd probably expect it to be with Reed Blankenship after the year that he had last year. Had some ups and downs, but I think they're really high on him going forward. They like his upside, so that should be the partnership on the back end for the Philadelphia Eagles now that CJ is back with them to anchor that secondary. Then, in some of the images I'm sure you saw, my favorite addition to this defense was Devin White. After he became a free agent, Darius Slay mentioned that right away he talked to Howie Roseman. He might have even reached out to Devin White and to try and get his thoughts on what he was going to do in free agency, where his head was at. And right away he said that he knew that Devin White could be a great addition to this team. He reached out to him. Obviously, Howie got to work like he does in the offseason, making a lot of moves like he has in previous years, not just in the draft, but also in free agency. The thing that really stood out to Darius Slay about Devin White is that he's very athletic. He's faster than you'd expect with how big he is. and he has great coverage skills and was right away on Darius Slay's radar right away once he became a free agent. And with all those things, he's my favorite addition just because when you think of the Eagles' defense, that great defensive line, you have Darius Slay in the backfield, you bring back CJ, but there's that massive hole right in the middle of it, and a lot of people don't really put as much value, I think, into how much easier, how much more dominant your team could be with a great inside linebacker there anchoring everything, being that quarterback in the middle of the entire defense to just get everybody into position, get everybody on the same assignment. It makes it a lot easier when you have a Fred Warner, a Roquan Smith, guys like that that really take the edge off of a lot of things if their range is all over the field, if they're covering tight ends, if they're blowing up run plays. It makes a world of difference, and that's just not what the Eagles had to their advantage last year. They had Nakobe Dean to start the year, but then he got hurt. They brought in Zach Cunningham and guys like that as well off of the market, like I mentioned, but it was never going to be the same. And now with Devin White, I think his time just ran up in Tampa Bay after they won the Super Bowl and he was part of that dominant defense. They sort of took a step back, and it looked like he just wasn't happy. They weren't really on amicable terms there with the organization, so it was probably in everyone's best interest for him to move on. And the Eagles didn't sign him to a massive deal. I know it's only a short-term deal, like a 1 or a 2-year deal for Devin White, but I think he has a good opportunity here to prove again to everyone that he has the capability of being a top 3, top 4 inside linebacker in this league. He has all the tools to do it. He has the smarts, the leadership, like we saw at LSU, translate right away to Tampa Bay. And now when the Eagles needed an inside linebacker, he's in a great spot to do that. So all those things wrapped into one. He was my favorite addition by far. I think he's going to do great there once the season starts in just about a month, almost 2 months now. So that should be exciting for the Eagles to have him in. I'm telling you, he's going to be very good for them this year. But then also, like you've seen in some of these pictures, some of the young players that Darius Slay touched upon on who he expects to have great years in 2024. We're going to start off with Jalen Carter. There you see him sacking Matthew Stafford. He had a great rookie year. I want to say surprising, but also really not, because he was one of the top players overall on the draft board last year, but there was that incident, off-the-field incident that had him drop a few spots, and people were wondering how far he was going to drop after that. The Eagles weren't going to think twice about it, even though their defensive line was already stacked. We're talking about Jalen Carter, who was being mentioned as a top 3, arguably the best player in the draft last year. So they had no second thoughts about it. They brought him in, and last year's rookie year was great. To start the year, he was super dominant, like the Eagles were at 10-1, but then sort of hit that rookie wall, and it just didn't look as dominant in the second half of the year. They started losing games, and now he wants to build upon that, and Darius Slay has really just praised Jalen Carter for just being a different beast, as he says in the episode with Chris Long. Also, that just building off of last year, he saw right away how special he was. He has all the intangibles to be a great defensive player. Chris Long even said it. He mentioned that Jalen Carter could be arguably the Eagles' best defensive lineman ever in history. This is just after 1 year. So I think a lot of people got a glimpse of that. It's just now about building on that. And Darius Slay seems to be very confident about that for Jalen Carter. And I do as well. But again, everything has to work. Everything has to be a cohesive unit for Jalen to take that next step. And that's where the next young player comes into the conversation, where this offseason, there was a lot of additions to this defense, but also one of their major losses was Hassan Reddick. For how dominant he was in terms of just numbers, putting up sacks for them, he became a reliable producer of just pressuring the quarterback and making it easier for the rest of that defensive line as well. Now that he's gone, they brought in Bryce Huff. You still have Josh Sweat in there. Jalen Carter's there, obviously, but you'd like to have another option to just rush the passer and just rotate some of those guys in, because you do still have Brandon Graham, but he is of a veteran status now, so he's not going to give you the reps really that a prime Brandon Graham would. So now we look at Nolan Smith. A lot of people probably wouldn't know that name unless you were a Philadelphia Eagles fan, but he was a 2023 first round pick as well, drafted along with Jalen Carter, but people hardly saw him. Like I mentioned last year, he fell below in that depth chart behind Hassan, behind Josh Sweat, and behind all their pass rushers, because initially people out of the draft said that he was going to be more of a developmental player. He was going to need time to really adapt to the NFL, and that's exactly what the first year was for him. Hardly played, like I mentioned, but now it looks like the Philadelphia Eagles are going to need him now more than ever, just basically on the basis that their depth isn't great right now on the edge pressure guys right now, because you have Bryce Huff, who had a great year last year for the Jets, but he really didn't play as many snaps as the outside defensive ends, outside pass rushers do for the Philadelphia Eagles. I want to say Hassan and Josh, in terms of their reps that they played, almost doubled that of Bryce Huff. So how much is he going to be able to withstand before he needs a sub or he needs a break? That's where Nolan Smith comes in. Darius Slay, on the topic of Nolan Smith, said that he was looking a lot different this year, just coming in with a different mindset. In practice, he's already started to show out and become a record basically on the defensive end position, and Slay has praised that. He's liked how he's practiced so far, and he even went as far as to say that this year is going to be a monster year for Nolan Smith, and that's a lot of pressure, that's a lot of praise for Nolan Smith. I haven't seen too much on him. He has the size and the speed that you would like, but I think when it comes to games, I'm a guy that likes to see it at least once. Show me it at least a couple times in the game before I really can buy into it. That uncertainty factor is the only thing holding me back from really believing Darius Slay. But overall, I think they've done a pretty good job of addressing a lot of their needs. Have they done enough to correct this defense fully? I don't think fully they've done that yet, because James Bradberry does scare me a little bit. Is he penciled in to be the starter right now? Probably, but they did draft Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, which I think are going to be great players for them. But again, are they going to be starters right away and be efficient starters right away is the main question. So if that plays out, obviously you can't tell. We have to go through training camp and everything like that. But I would have liked to have seen him maybe add another pass rusher or another inside linebacker, because outside of Devin White, Nakobe Dean has struggled with injuries, and then after that, I quite frankly don't know who they have at that position. So to say that they fully have done it, have they done enough? I don't think so. They're missing one or two pieces, but it's just overall definitely in a better spot than it was a few months ago. So that's really, it's more positive than negative for the Philadelphia Eagles. They've done a good job, because I do think they do realize that this year, with the addition of Saquon, getting him in, they have to do whatever it takes to get back to the Super Bowl. And with this team that they're building, they're giving themselves a great shot, but a few more pieces that they add here and there, I think will go a long way in terms of depth when you get to week 15 through 17, where you really need it heading into the playoffs. But that's just me. I might be nitpicking a little bit, but overall, they've done a decent job at it. I'll give them some of the credit there. But that'll do it for that segment. We will go to a quick break right now, and when we return, two more topics to talk about. One on some of the first-round rookies that have signed their deal, but J.J. McCarthy is being left out as one of the only rookies to not sign their rookie deal, so we're going to see why that is. And also, a little bit of an open discussion between Brandon Ayuk and Devontae Adams. Who is most likely to get traded this offseason, and who, if they do get traded, is likely to make the bigger impact on the team that they are traded to? Those two topics are coming up right after this. Don't go anywhere.